Who wants to go to a job interview and put your hand up and say you're looking to become a parent? Because there is, especially in tech, still a stigma, I think, which we're trying to break through podcasts like this, around being a parent and being a contributing member of a company. And yes, you can do both.
Recently on this podcast, we talked to Chelsea Fagan about the death of the girl boss, a fraught term that drew a lot of public attention and discourse. In some ways, it was a distraction that obfuscated the important conversations that need to be had about women entrepreneurs and women in tech generally, like today's conversation, which features Erin Bury, CEO and co-founder of Willful, and Marie Chevrier, founder and CEO of Sampler. In addition to scaling their businesses, both have incubated enterprises of a different sort, and both ran into challenges when they tried to access the parental support available to all other Canadians, just because they're entrepreneurs. Now, in Marie's case, she was denied maternity leave benefits. In Erin's case, it was actually her husband and co-founder who was denied those benefits. And while we discuss the Byzantine requirements for Canadian entrepreneurs to receive benefits on this podcast, it's not just about the entrepreneurs. It may surprise you, but my co-host, Rob Kennedy, has kids. And on this podcast, he discusses some of the decisions he had to navigate as an employee of various tech companies. It's also not just a pure benefits conversation. It's also about board support, investor support, company support, so people can be making the right decision for them and for their family. And look, I'm going big tent here, but I want to swing back to how I started this conversation. According to a March 2021 report by RBC, nearly 500,000 Canadian women who left the workforce during the pandemic have not returned to work. These tough decisions are not evenly distributed. As Marie put it to the Canadian press in a recent profile when she found out she didn't qualify for maternity benefits, she, quote, didn't have the energy to be upset. As a founder, that strikes a chord. And I only have cats. But Marie is here today, and I think we should all listen to what she has to say. Let's dig in. Startwell is Toronto's best place for innovators to create and collaborate. With studios, meeting rooms, and event venues you can book on demand. The vibe and amenities here make Startwell feel like a boutique hotel for company gatherings. It is comfy and fun. Of course, every gathering is also an opportunity to create content these days, and Startwell houses industry-leading media production studios, plus a team who produce professionally cinematic work like this podcast. Once a week, I cycle across town, braving traffic and the threat of being killed by numerous Uber drivers to find sanctuary here at Startwell. If you're looking for such a place in Toronto, I recommend you check it out. Maybe this is the first question. Was it figuring out as an entrepreneur how to go on parental leave, or given some of the things we're going to talk about, learning how to navigate what the government expects from an entrepreneur looking to go on parental leave? Is that maybe a better way of framing it?
Yeah. Well, I had to do both, but I will say, that's one of the things that was most frustrating is that months before my parental leave, I was planning for my leave, right? So you would imagine, like, as soon as we found out that we were going to have our first child, I started having discussions with my husband and also with the board and also with my executive team about how we were going to make this happen. And our plan was like bulletproof. Like we had, being at the time about 7 years into the business, I had a structured executive team. I had coverage, right? So it was going to be fine for the company for me to go on leave and ultimately enjoy that time with my son. So I spent the time preparing for that. And the way that kind of parental leave applications work is that, you need a birth date. And so like you actually typically end up planning with the government post having the baby, right? So
you got to close the deal first,
right? You got to close
the
deal before you're applying for it, right? So it was very early into having Dawson join the family that I ended up actually applying for employee employment insurance. And that's when I realized that actually it was going to be a little bit more complicated. So what ended up happening is that the CRA started, without me really realizing, auditing my involvement with the company. So they started calling my phone and listening to my voicemail and realizing that I hadn't actually changed my voice message. So I'd still said, "Hey, I'm Marie from Sampler." Well, if you're from our generation, you recognize that you probably never check your voicemail. And so you probably definitely don't update your voicemail. But I also am Marie from Sampler. So like it wouldn't be like a completely crazy
I'm Marie,
thing.
not from Sampler.
Yes.
So
You've caught me in a lie, government bureaucrat. I'm just thinking that I think my voicemail, which I honestly haven't thought about it since you brought it up, and maybe since I said it, probably tells people to not leave a voicemail and to tweet me instead, and that's obviously out of date. So it's point taken here that maybe as an entrepreneur and as someone preparing to welcome a child in your family, maybe your voicemail message is not the first thing that you'd be thinking of.
Exactly.
Was this the level of investigation that you felt was being kind of like represented in evaluating whether or not you were being sincere about the fact that you were going on parental leave, or like what were they trying to identify?
Yeah, and that's the problem, is that when I first got the initial call, like they the person actually didn't really explain what they were auditing for, but she asked me questions like, "Hey, I noticed you didn't change your voicemail." And I was like, "Oh my God, like I didn't realize I had to change my voicemail," right? So I wasn't really being told what was going on, but I could tell that they were digging. You know, on a second call, recognized that I didn't have an out of office on my email, which I didn't, because I actually had at the time a chief of staff who was monitoring my email. And frankly, like I get a lot of emails, so it would be like a bit annoying for her to go through like all of that. So it's like it was just like a crazy thing that after a few times I was like, hey, like maybe I should look into eligibility a little bit further. And it came down to the fact that ultimately there's ruling that says that if you can't actually step back from the business, and certainly ownership has to do with that kind of guideline, then that if you're deemed to not be able to step back, then you should not be receiving benefits. But the lines are pretty hard drawn on ownership, and also on like the title. So in this case, it was for me, it wasn't about ownership, but it was about, you know, this further investigation that they were looking at. So
yeah, and it's important to note maybe that what we're talking about here when it comes to government support, not corporate support of parental leave, we should be digging into some of the EI benefits and the stipulations there. I think we'll get to that in a bit. But would it be fair to say that you kind of felt you were being like investigated at the level of those officials that are looking to like stop illegal immigration by like having couples prove that they really are in love with each other and they're not just getting married for a visa? Like, did you feel like it was on par with what you were trying to get back in return or applying for? Or did it feel maybe offset from what I guess our government's in service of?
I guess it just did not feel straightforward or transparent. And I wish that, you know, we could have been more straightforward at first to say, like, first of all, let's educate entrepreneurs of that situation, because I could have potentially planned a little better. But frankly, I just think the policy is wrong. So we should just kind of rethink that policy, full stop. But it really just wasn't transparent, and it really did feel, it felt uncomfortable in a time that like I should have been supported by the government.
Gotcha. Okay. Erin, you're coming at this from a slightly different perspective because you are not only, you're conceiving, prepping for launch, you're looking to close baby number 2, but you are running a company with your husband as co-founders. So this is parental leave that we're talking about here. This just wasn't a circumstance that you were in. It was a circumstance that Kevin, your co-founder husband, all around good guy, was in as well. Could you describe kind of how, I guess, Willful approached this and maybe where you got hung up in the process?
For sure. Well, I think, Marie, thanks for sharing your experience. I was absolutely shocked to read the Canadian Press article you were quoted in, where it said that because of this investigation, you actually only took 6 weeks of leave. To me, that was the criminal part of all of it, is that you had done all this prep, and that 6 weeks, like, that's just not enough for anybody, let alone someone who put all this planning into place. So I'm so sorry you had to go through that. And thanks for sharing your story. Listen, I'm a super type A person. So my planning for parental leave started before I was even had kids on the radar, right? Because I think you're in this unique position as an entrepreneur where you are irreplaceable. Yes, you can build an executive team, but in the early days, when it was just Kev, myself, and our CTO, nobody else was doing the functions that I was doing. So back in 2019, 2020, started thinking about, okay, we know we'll want to expand our family in the next few years. So we brought our COO, Julia Wilkie, on, who's amazing, and kind of said, listen, we need an operations lead, but part of your mandate is to essentially be my number two and to learn all of the functions that I handle, and for me to be able to step away from the business for a period of time. I think, though, when you're an entrepreneur, you know that it's not going to be the 12 to 18 months that your friends are taking. And I think there's this kind of tacit agreement that, part of being a founder is being really passionate about what you do, yes, but also recognizing that you're probably going to take a shorter leave. It's going to look a bit different, and you are going to have a finger on the pulse. Not that you're going to be, if the CRA is listening, working every day, but that you are going to want to know what's happening because you care about the company. So I originally planned to take 3 months, and I spoke with a variety of women like Laura from Policy Me and Alyssa from Rate Hub and all of these other founders who had taken leave, and said to them, what did you do right and what did you do wrong? And one of the consistent pieces of feedback I heard was being prescriptive about how long I would take off, because everyone has different deliveries. Everyone's hormone levels are different. And for me, I intended to take 3 months, but I was still a weepy mess at 3 months and ended up taking 4. And so I think leaving the door open was really helpful. Obviously, having Julia in place was really helpful, just to be able to take over some of those functions and to feel like there was someone who, was basically interim CEO while I was away. And then, doing a level of diligence around, having a Notion repository of all of the key functions and walkthroughs.
Oh my God,
making sure that T's were dotted and I's were crossed.
We're going to get to your level of type A-ness later.
We're going to get to Notion. But to Marie's point, like nobody tells you what to do. There's no government website that says, hey, if you're an entrepreneur, here's what you should do when you go on parental leave. There's just resources for the average Canadian who's going on parental leave. And so I actually didn't know that if you have a certain level of ownership, you can't pay into EI and you can't get government benefits. I was actually under that level of ownership and had been paying into EI, and so was able to go on government benefits, which I'm thankful for, especially hearing Marie's story. But I'd say there's certainly, Anna Rosen, formerly Anna McKenzie, put together the Expecting Parent Playbook for business owners many years ago. And that, to my knowledge, was really the first resource that was aimed at any parent in the tech industry and helping them navigate it. But there's a severe lack of resources from the government, to Marie's point.
Yeah. And I think, so noting a couple of things, we're definitely going to be referencing the wonderful CP story by Tara Deschamps in this. We'll link to it. We'll link to a bunch of other resources, not only the one you just mentioned, Erin, but the ones produced by Marie and Erin on BetaKit for people to use. Very helpful. Thank you. But I think it's probably, I want to get Rob you in here and talk about kind of your experience, because although you are a kind of repeat founder, your experience was happening while you were kind of on the leadership team of a company, slightly different scenario. But it probably makes sense right now for us to kind of lay out some of the conditions here so people get a sense of this, right? So like Canada's employment insurance program can give up to 55% of earnings. I think that's like $650 a week as a maximum for people away for work. I think up to 600 hours But for self-employed people who run their own business or control more than 40% of the voting shares of the corporation, and that's an important number right there, you can apply for maternity and parental leave, sickness, family caregiver, compassionate care benefits, but there's like additional criteria for you. One of the criteria, which I think speaks to the point of like, we have two super A-type experienced entrepreneurs here talk about the level of preparedness that they were putting in months in advance before even knowing baby due dates, notions being made. Our government requires that you register for this program 12 months before drawing benefits, which again, don't have kids, have cats, seems misaligned to the time it takes to create a life.
Well, Erin would have got it because she started like before they even thought it.
Yes. So if you are the level of A-type that Erin Bury is, and for longtime listeners and now viewers of this podcast, you know I am back referencing a lot of stuff that has appeared on this podcast. You're A-okay. But if you're, I'll make a judgment here. I'll make a value judgment. A normal human being, maybe you're not thinking about applying for a program you might not know exists 3 months before the 9-month window of your baby being conceived and born. Just going to lay that out there. So I think in that CP story that we noted before, there was one founder quoted basically being like, at earlier stage than I think Sampler and Willful are, where their ownership stake was over 40% and were basically kind of cut out from receiving these benefits, which, Erin, you've done content for us before about the value of retaining ownership in your company, not raising equity to a point that kind of like, prices you out of ownership. That's smart kind of like financial planning for running a startup, incongruous to receiving benefits to like take time off for raising a life.
So I was under the threshold and Kevin was over the threshold. And so he was unable to get any. He actually took 8 months of parental leave. I took 4, and then he took 8 months, and he was unable to get any government benefits. So we definitely saw the disparity between someone who has less ownership, who is able to actually apply for the traditional mat leave benefits that you would get through EI, and then the Marie example of kind of a founder who didn't even know, like we didn't even know we had to apply in advance for these things, to your point, Douglas.
Yeah. Okay. And then just to underscore it, that is same company, same family, same baby, different results for like the two parents in that equation, right?
Because there's a different percentage on the cap table.
Yeah, 100%. And honestly, maybe they were making a value judgment as to which Willful co-founder they enjoyed the most. I'm not gonna speculate. I guess I just did. Rob, let's get you in here because again, we want to make this an overarching conversation about the difficulties for parental leave and maybe let's say policy and practices that need to be changed, support resources for people who are going through this, particularly like post-COVID, right? Knowing you, potting with you for a very long time, you've had some interesting circumstances here because not only you were doing this at TWG in some very specific roles, but I also think this was overlapping with some of the time that you spent in New York, right? I'm not misremembering that. So could you like plug in your experience with like, shipping a few new products while
MVPs?
Also, yeah.
MVPs. I think, so notwithstanding the fact that I was on the executive team, the leadership team of that company. It was not my company, so I'm not in the same situation quite as Erin and Marie are.
In a couple different ways.
At least one. It is worth noting that when I joined the company in 2014, we were about 50 people, and there was no mat leave, anything, no policy. So I joined the company, took a couple of weeks off for the baby, came back and was on the road because I was doing sales. Eventually it took it was a ground up thing from the team. It was like, you know what, maybe we should do this. Eventually we sort of enacted a policy that like, does something beyond what the government does for the team. But it was interesting going through the process on, I guess a couple thoughts. One is like, yes, we moved to Manhattan, when my kid was just under 2. The juxtaposition there is very interesting because corporates don't tend to top up anything at all. Or actually, that's not true. I've got it wrong. The government doesn't do anything. Your only hope is corporations. If your corporation offers you a benefits package, you got it. In Canada, we get something if you check off the right boxes. And then if your benefits plan designed by your team tops up, it can top up to be beyond the number, because most people make more than $600 a month, week, whatever, which is also taxed, by the way. Yeah. The thing, I mean, I had the same sort of experience as both of you, in the sense it was like, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what you're doing. And there's a sense of determinism that is unrealistic. We had a medical condition that caused my wife to, she gave birth 2 weeks later than expected, and she had to be induced because of some medical stuff. So it's like, well, how do you tell the government that I'm going to have some medical stuff? And by the way, the first thing on my list isn't go to the government, then deal with the emergency situation.
Fill out this form,
right? Like, that's not, normal humans don't work that way. And so I think it's a little naive to think that is the list of things that you do. It's hard enough to do an EI claim when you're unemployed, much less you're bringing a life into the world and dealing with all the stuff that comes along with it. Because it's not like the baby shows up, you're out of the hospital or home, and then everything's just fine. You don't sleep. In the best case, you don't sleep for weeks or months. In the best case. Yeah. In the worst case, there are complications that require you, the baby, some other stuff to happen that you can't plan for. And the idea that you can plan for it, as much as the best laid plans, you have those things laid out, that's cool. And then the plan meets reality.
Okay. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, because you were on the leadership team of that company, so you had some influence, but it obviously wasn't yours, and they've been acquired and you don't work there anymore. So I think we're totally good.
The second baby's pat leave policy was fantastic.
Did you feel that, like, how many employees was TWG at when you were having your child?
50.
50. Okay.
Yeah.
So do you feel like TWG was a little bit behind on having that stuff in place, or is it the classic startup thing of like, and this might be a male lens here, seeing it this way, we don't try to solve problems until we run into them. And this one happens to be a baby. We have a baby problem now that we need to solve. We have
I was not the catalyst of that solve. It was actually a female member of the team who's like, which is, shouldn't be the case.
Knowing,
yeah. So I think, we learned late. It's also one of those things where whatever the ownership stake of the company is for the entrepreneur, if you're like 5 people or 7 people or 8 people or 20 people or whatever, it's taking 3 months off is really difficult, because you're integral to the running of the business. So I understand that whatever the equity stake of the business is by law, but it's kind of like, what do we want as a society? Do we want people who start businesses, and if they happen to be, if you're not allowed to run a business, if you're not allowed to go on pat leave or mat leave or any kind of parental leave if you're less than 20 people, like, what's the magic number? Don't know what the magic number is. 50 is obviously big enough where we should have had it together, but it's not a simple thing for the entrepreneur to just step away from their business when they're usually actively running it. It's not a realistic expectation to have the founder walk away from their business. You shouldn't punish them for being pregnant, and especially, and we might get into this, but we saw this during the pandemic. Both Erin and Marie, your stories were around 2021. This is post-pandemic. We were living a remote life, and what happened? First of all, as a society, we were kind of okay with remote. So you're not just going to turn off your voicemail and email. The only way you're keeping in touch with your business is by email, quite frankly. Secondly, we saw that we lost a ton of women in the workforce because of the pandemic, notwithstanding the birth stuff. Yeah. We literally just lost women in the workforce. So the question is, what kind of society do we want to build? Do we give a shit about growing it and having members of our society that we want to encourage to do entrepreneurship, or do we want to actively or implicitly discourage it?
Hey everybody, Zoholics is coming. Now, Zoholics is Zoho's premier user conference that brings together professionals from various industries to learn from experts, collaborate with peers, and gain valuable insights on how to leverage Zoho's suite of innovative and powerful software solutions. Taking place in Toronto, September 12th to 13th, this year's Zoholics is their biggest yet, reflecting Zoho's increasing prowess as a single platform to run your entire business. Now, With exclusive insights, hands-on training, personalized one-on-one sessions, and networking opportunities, Zoholics helps businesses streamline their processes, improve collaboration, and accelerate their growth. So join them this September as they give you the opportunity to scope out all things Zoho and acquire the resources you'll need to transcend your business. Oh, by the way, you can use the code BetaKit25 and get tickets off at a 25% discount. So head to events.zoho.com and use the code BetaKit25 to get your tickets right now at a 25% discount. I think we're all agreed that the way that the government has structured this is that they're obviously looking for indicators of something and trying to infer from that capacity, importance, whether or not you'd actually take time off.
Right.
I think this was not done in consultation with anyone from our ecosystem to truly understand any of the considerations you laid out or Erin and Marie did. So I think it's established for this podcast that this needs a reworking. But I want to go back to the stuff that is within our realm of control, which is the company policy stuff. And maybe I'll start with you first, Erin, and then go to you, Marie, because you were noting the preparedness and planness. What were you doing from a benefits and planning perspective? Maybe knowing that you were going to go through this, but eventually you're going to have employees go through this. I think Erin, we've talked before on the podcast. You've always had an interesting approach to certain employee benefits that were, let's say, targeted to the demographic of your employees and things like that. And when were you looking to incorporate that? And maybe to both of you, is this potentially a retention or recruitment advantage for companies that are on this? Speaking to what Rob was just talking about in terms of the number of women who left the workforce during the pandemic because those companies weren't set up or their home circumstances weren't set up to allow for that. Does that resonate, Erin?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think first off the bat, I'll just say, I mean, I ran an agency for 6 years prior to Willful. I had multiple people go through becoming parents while they were there. And it was only when I became a parent and went through that journey myself that I had the empathy to truly understand how I could support parents in the workplace. So Rob, to your point about TWG, I think a lot of times you often are a champion for benefits that you've been through or a champion for accommodations for people that you understand kind of the nuances around it, right? So I'm ashamed to admit we probably didn't have adequate parental leave policies. We probably didn't make them known, right? So we left the onus up to a job applicant to ask about those in the interview process, which is also a barrier, right? Who wants to go to a job interview and put your hand up and say you're looking to become a parent? Because there is, especially in tech, still a stigma, I think, which we're trying to break through podcasts like this, around being a parent and being a contributing member of a company. And yes, you can do both. So since then at Willful, I've tried to become a bit of a champion, both externally and internally, for being a parent and balancing that. And to Rob's point, COVID has made that easier, right? I was able to come back after 4 months and breastfeed in between meetings. And, I had a partner who was happy to go on a longer parental leave than me because he had no ego around the mom being the one who had to take that. And we have built in some policies like top up, which is probably still not as good as a large company would offer. I think we only do about 6 weeks, but more importantly, I think the policy around flex work, right? The ability to kind of work when it makes sense for you. For example, my daughter's daycare is closed this week. And so I might be working at 7 a.m. and taking her to the park at 11 a.m. And we always have to do daycare pickups. And just, I think, a workforce that accommodates more flexibility around blending being a parent and an employee. But our approach at Willful has really been, okay, how can we build in flexibility? How can we build in the financial benefits that complement the government benefits? And more importantly, how can we surface these things earlier in the process so that we aren't putting the onus on job applicants to seek out this information and to worry that it will cost them their job, and to be open about the fact that we are a parent friendly, we accommodate all types of family situations, and we don't want you to feel like you can't be open about wanting to grow a family or telling us about that process as you go through it.
And Marie, we'd love to get your input. And the thing that I've heard over the years is, and I don't know if you've seen this in your tenure, investors will be like, well, hold on a second. You're a female, you're a young female founder. Are you going to have a kid? Yeah. So there's the team, but there's also like attracting. Can you speak to, like, add on to what Erin was saying, but also have you seen that kind of attitude, and what do you do about that?
Yeah, like pressure on the top, pushing down a little bit, maybe.
Yeah, and I will say, like, my biggest lesson through this experience was that I did not advocate for myself as much, because Sampler does have a sampler, like a parental leave top up. So we top up for up to 8 weeks. And, that was put in place before I went on leave. And when I believe that it is that pressure that made me feel like, well, if the government is not going to do their part in that, then, I really should be working, or else I'll need to go back to the board and say, like, hey, they're not they're not giving me the base. So therefore, like, you'd have to top me up and then also cover that in order to actually to give me that 8 weeks, right? I feel like I felt the pressure, which was completely silly and very silly.
So it wasn't there. This was imagined.
It was imagined for sure. Okay. But I think looking back, I wasn't in the place to advocate for myself with the government or with the board. I was vulnerable. I was like, trying to figure it all out. And it wasn't a really good time for me to be advocating for myself. But going back to kind of that pressure that's like hidden, I've shared that story before, but it's still to this day, cannot believe it happened. But, early into the Sampler days, maybe like 4 years in, I had just gotten engaged. So I had a ring on my finger that wasn't there before when I went into an investor meeting. And the investor literally said to me, like, oh, I see you got engaged. Are you just going to want to go have babies now? Literally word for word. Yeah. So like, when you think about these things that happened in my time, I can understand how I felt vulnerable to go back and like ask for more. And so, it was much more easy for me to be like, oh, I can handle it. I can get back to work. I can get back faster. And I wish I didn't do that. And certainly, like, hopefully if we're lucky enough to continue to grow our family, like, I would absolutely advocate for myself better. But I shouldn't have to do that. And that's the point, right? Like, what frustrated me the most about this is that the company that I have founded does have parental benefits that support parents. The company that I founded employs 50 people. Like, we create jobs. Since the age of 15, I pay into EI. Like, it's just like morally wrong that like the people that are driving the Canadian economy are being put through this process. Like, I understand that there's a certain level of involvement that we have to have, but that should be okay. Like, I just don't imagine that the CEO of Goldman Sachs is getting audited if he is taking, like, it's just really interesting, right? You could be in a leadership position. The point is, you could be in a leadership position that is actually far more demanding than perhaps my position. Yet you are not going to be audited because of your percentage ownership, but I am going to be, because like, it just doesn't make sense.
Marie, I just want to note for the audience that that's not the first time that you've shared this story. It was actually something we included in a report, I think last year, on some of the biases that women entrepreneurs face raising capital. We'll make sure to link to that story as well in the show notes, because I think one of the reasons why we wanted to talk to you both, and acknowledging that maybe not at all times have you felt comfortable or in a position to advocate for yourself. Both of you, as your companies have grown and you've become more comfortable, established, have really, I would say, gone above and beyond being really public in the Canadian ecosystem, kind of sharing what you've learned and some of the struggles that you have. So I just really want to acknowledge that this isn't the first time that you've talked about these things, and that I think it really helps kind of sharing these considerations.
I think Marie brings up a really great point, which is we put so much pressure on ourselves as entrepreneurs, not as parents in general, right? And I've been pretty public about rejecting this whole hustle culture where if you're not working 24/7, you're not a quote unquote good entrepreneur. And I think a lot of the guilt that I felt about taking parental leave or taking a break to be with my family was very self-imposed, to Marie's point, right? You're kind of conditioned in tech to feel like if you go start a family, you have to be able to do it all simultaneously, and that actually taking a break to just be with your family is somehow showing a sign of weakness or a lack of dedication to your company. And this is not pressure that was put on me by my board. When I told our board member, Liam, our main investor, that I was pregnant, he was so excited. He's like, yeah, forget the plan for a minute. This is super exciting, like super supportive, had confidence in the plan, knew our COO, Julia, who was taking over. I didn't have any. We raised around when I was pregnant the first time and just are closing another bit of funding now while I'm pregnant with the second one. And fortunately, I haven't come across any douchebags.
That's a weird fundraising hack.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Joanna at Nix follows the same timeline there. But yeah, I haven't had anyone kind of react negatively. In fact, I've been very open about it and I haven't really left the door open to any criticism. Like, this is what it is. Here's how we're handling it. I'm not really accepting questions at this time because it's a non-issue. And thankfully, people have been supportive of that. But I would say we as the person giving birth, as an entrepreneur, maybe not the partner, I think, Marie, correct me if you don't feel this way, but I think there's a lot of self-imposed guilt around, like, are we good enough entrepreneurs because we're taking time to focus on our family and not just on our business?
Yeah, that's right. Definitely. And it was also around, like, I think the same time as supply chain crisis hit. So being that we ship consumer packaged good products, it was pretty like impacted. And so it all of that just made me feel like I couldn't ask, but probably could have.
Let's get proactive. Let's get helpful then and close this out, because both of you have written an endless number of words published on BetaKit, providing kind of like parent CEO pro tips. So I think, Marie, we're going to let you go first because I think we published yours first, but then also I had to edit Erin's and she basically gave me 5,000 words of bullet points, and I'm still emotionally scarred by that. So I'm very happy to have you, Marie, lead on your very efficient use of language to provide advice to our readers and listeners. What would be your number one or top 5 kind of tips, or even just a mindset mentality to think through this if you have founders who are looking to kind of roll this out of their company?
I think one of the biggest things that I would say is the plan is going to implode at impact. Like the moment that you have a child, like everything's just changes. They are so much cuter than you could ever imagine, and like they're all the good stuff, but there's also all of the the very difficult things. And I think that Erin spoke to that, like having a lot of flexibility in your plan is really important. And for me, the thing that was a huge help was having a second in command who basically I knew would take decisions the exact same way that I would. Like, she was my chief of staff, and now she's our chief operating officer. I speak about her all the time. Her name is Shanazy. She's incredible. But we just fly this on the same wave. And so she basically took it upon herself, and she was like, I'm just going to make 90% of decisions. And if I really, really need you, we'll ping you. But having that kind of dedicated person, so that you don't have to talk with the entire team, and that these kind of asks can come from one person, can be prioritized, can be streamlined into one touch base a week, one touch base every 2 weeks. And I think that really, really helped.
Awesome. And I should note here, I'm playing up for our audience here a little bit of a disparity between Marie and Erin for the lulls. But I should also note that Marie is super A-type as well, because when she drafted this for us, whether she remembers or not, she actually gave a pie chart breakdown of how she spends her time. She had done the Marie metadata collection to understand exactly how much time she was spending on team reporting, strategy or key initiatives, tactical meetings, press and thought leadership, and investor relations. So
I want to see how much poop is now taking up.
Just like
the
managing
new pie
like,
chart.
Yeah,
the new pie chart is just poop.
Or just like
50%
baby hygienics management
Exactly.
would probably be the HR acceptable term for that. Okay, Erin, is what Marie's saying resonate, and do you have anything to add on top of that? Because I know part of what Marie's talking about is like time away and trust in people to carry things forward, which I think you've kind of spoken to and agree with. But I also know every time I see a photo or get a lens inside of what's going on in Willful, you're usually there with the baby. Like the baby has attended more board meetings than I have, like in this instance. So you've really kind of integrated that into, I don't want to say your management style, but just kind of blending that. Any other piece of advice you'd have, or how were you kind of like reconciling that when you came back at Willful?
Well, she really doesn't carry her weight from like an output perspective. So I'll really have to work on that.
Low performer.
But I mean, I think it goes back to the idea of normalizing, right? We as leaders set the tone from the top, whether it's taking vacation, sending emails at 2 a.m., or being camera off in a meeting because you're breastfeeding. And to me, being really open and transparent about how I was incorporating our baby into my work life was important, just because I kind of am an open book person. And so I share whatever I'm going through with my team. But it also, this underlying reason was I want them to know it's okay to have a kid. I want them to know that you can care about your work and also care about your family. And honestly, the reason I wrote that article for BetaKit was partly because I was starting to get pregnant women or other parents and expecting parents reaching out for the same advice I was looking for. So it wasn't to avoid a bunch of phone calls. I love hopping on with people who are expecting and talking about my tips, but it was to point them to a tactical resource.
You did kind of say like, this will save me like 20 coffee meetings a week if I publish this.
It will.
I was like, that's a great pitch.
It has as well. It has as well, but it's also because Marie's post was really one of the only tactical resources that I found, not about how to set up a parental policy for your company, but how to, as a founder, as a leader in tech, how to go on parental leave. Like tactically, what did you do? Did you put an out of office on? Did you have someone manage your inbox? How long did you say you were going to take? What did you communicate? When did you communicate with the board and how? And so I wanted to kind of create that resource for other folks out there, and frankly, also record it for myself, since I should probably go read it again, knowing that I'm due in 5 weeks and want to make sure I followed my own advice. The quick kind of biggest tips that I took away from other people, including Marie and others in the community, were: number one, don't communicate a return date to your team, because you might feel differently, and leaving it open-ended. Even if you discuss it with your leadership team, leave it open-ended to the team to give yourself some grace. Have someone, for God's sake, manage your inbox. In my case, it was our wonderful virtual assistant, Amanda, who I gave clear instructions to on how to triage that and who to send things on to. And finally, create a repository of all the things that live in your brain, not just because of parental leave and having your team be able to handle things, but also, listen, I'm in the business of succession planning. The hit by a bus factor will make you feel so much better if you have all of those things that you own in your head documented and out. And to be honest, my second mat leave is so much easier because I put together that Notion hub the first time around, and it was just a matter of updating that. So there's lots more tactical pieces in terms of when to start this stuff and what to do in the article I wrote, but those are the ones that really that stood me in good stead.
Yeah, that's awesome. And open invitation or offer for both of you to do a refresh on those articles, because I think particularly around this, it's a great opportunity to, as you've become more experienced parental founders, to refresh information in there. Rob, I guess maybe we'll kind of close up from you. I know you shared a little bit more context of your circumstances were slightly different, but I'm happy for you to take it either as a father of children, or as a executive leader at a company that was figuring this out at maybe an employee size that was a little bit bigger than where Willful and Sampler were at the time. And any other things that you saw in terms of maybe if it's not sole founder or co-founder driven conversations, maybe how this is communicated amongst the leadership team, things like that, how enabling getting a decision done if it's a bit more consensus driven?
Yeah, I think their points are excellent. I think the through lines that to keep emphasizing to folks is have empathy for yourself, like be kind to yourself. There's no reason as a founder you're a jerk to yourself for every other reason. This is not another reason to beat yourself up.
Yeah.
I also find that this is true for general parenting, but nobody knows what they're talking about. Everyone gives you advice on how to parent, and they're generally not the way you would do it. They're generally either wrong or it doesn't make any sense. So everyone's got their own opinions. I'd say, find what works for you. Both of you have made, both Erin and Marie have made points about just communicating about how you're thinking about it and how you're acting and what you're doing. Being communicative is okay. I think that's the right thing to do. I think the last point is we shouldn't have to rely on private businesses. I think Canada as a country, one of the reasons you want to come here is because it's got a social safety net that encourages entrepreneurship, not discourages entrepreneurship. Really, that's the dream, we hope. And so let's not put ourselves through these unforced errors where we're relying on private companies and small entrepreneurs who are the future of what Canada is going to be to carry the load, both financially and emotionally. We should think about how we want to encourage the population to grow and build and not discourage because of excessive policing or antiquated policies. I think that it's good that private companies are making up the difference as much as they can, depending on the size that they are and with the assets that they have. But we shouldn't put it on Marie and Erin's shoulders to be like, God, as founders, you got to figure it out for yourself. Good luck. Good luck having a kid, and you have to navigate all the other crap on top of the business that you're running, which is always exploding in some way on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, we really appreciate you sharing this stuff, but we shouldn't be looking to the Maries and Erins of the world to fill in a gap that should be obviously solved by our government, because this is just good economic policy. Like, I think, again, no kids, 3 cats, and I go to the 3 of you for decisions on everything because I don't make good ones. So my only contribution to this is to look directly in the camera and say, we obviously need to change the policy around parental leave for entrepreneurs and business leaders, because it doesn't make any fucking sense. So that said, thank you both for being here. Thank you, Rob, for contributing to this. And we have so many resources for you, listeners and viewers. So either links in the doobly-doo or in the show notes on betakit.com, because our guests have put a lot of time in sharing their learnings to make your life easier. I can personally attest to how helpful that's been in other regards, non-baby related, but definitely having an EA check your inbox is, whether or not you have kids, that's, it's delicious. It's icing on the cake. So check out their resources, read this stuff, consume this stuff, and then maybe we'll do a refresh in September when the new baby drops, a little version 2.0 update.
Love it.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.